Homeless at 19, Elena spent her nights sleeping under bus stops beside the freezing harbor. One desperate morning, she used her last $10 to buy a rusted abandoned houseboat. Nobody wanted, but after hearing strange noises below deck that same night, she discovered a hidden room, and a terrifying secret powerful men had been hiding for 20 years. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. Rain crashed against the city all night. Cold wind rushed through the empty streets near the harbor, carrying the smell of salt water and rust. Neon signs flickered weakly through the storm, while people hurried, home beneath umbrellas. Nobody noticed the girl sitting alone under the broken bus stop. 19-year-old Elena Carter pulled her thin jacket tighter around her body. Her shoes were soaked. Her fingers shook from the cold. Beside her sat a torn backpack. Everything she owned was inside it. Few clothes, a half-empty water bottle, $2.30, and one old photograph. Elena stared at the picture carefully. It showed her as a little girl beside her mother near a lake. Her mother's arm wrapped around her shoulders protectively. That was years ago, before hospitals, before debt, before cancer stole the only person who truly loved her. A car splashed dirty rainwater across the sidewalk. Elena closed her eyes. 3 weeks earlier, she still had a life. Not a perfect one, but a life. She worked late shifts at a small diner downtown. The pay was terrible, but it covered rent for her tiny apartment. Every morning she woke exhausted, yet hopeful that someday things would improve. Then one morning she arrived at work and found chains on the doors. The owner had disappeared overnight. No warning, no final paycheck, nothing. After that, everything collapsed fast. Rent became impossible. Bills piled up. Her landlord stopped pretending to care. "You've got 48 hours, he told her coldly. She begged him for more time. He didn't even look at her. 2 days later, her belongings were thrown into the alley beside garbage bags. Just like that. She became invisible. Homeless at 19, thunder echoed across the harbor. Elena looked toward the distant lights reflecting on dark water. Huge luxury yachts floated peacefully, while she sat freezing beneath a leaking bus stop. Life felt cruel sometimes. Some people slept in floating mansions. Others prayed for a dry place to survive the night. Her stomach twisted painfully from hunger. She unwrapped the last half of a sandwich and ate slowly, trying to make it last. Then she heard shouting nearby. "Harbor auction tomorrow morning!" An older man wearing a yellow raincoat stapled papers onto a wooden pole. Abandoned boats, cheap storage units, final sales. Most people ignored him. But Elena kept staring at one word: boats. The next morning, thick grey fog covered the harbor. Workers moved crates along wet docks, while seagulls screamed overhead. Rusted chains clanged loudly against metal poles. Elena walked slowly through the crowd with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. She didn't know why she came. Maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, maybe because homeless people begin searching for hope in strange places. The auction platform stood near the edge of Pier 14. Several abandoned boats floated nearby, tied loosely against old wooden docks. Some were massive fishing boats. Others looked completely destroyed. Broken glass, rotting wood, collapsed roofs. The auctioneer shouted numbers, while bored buyers raised their hands lazily. Elena watched quietly from the back. Then she saw it. A small rusted houseboat hidden between two larger vessels. Its faded blue paint peeled away in long strips. The windows were cracked. Rust covered nearly every surface. One side leaned dangerously toward the water, but something about it felt different, sad, forgotten, like it had been waiting for someone. Elena stepped closer. "What happened to that one?" she asked a dock worker. The man laughed immediately. "That piece of junk?" He shook his head. "Been sitting here almost 20 years. Why? Nobody wants it." He pointed toward the dark lower windows. Owner disappeared years ago. Weird stories followed after that. Elena frowned. "What kind of stories?" The worker lowered his voice slightly. "Lights turning on at night. Footsteps inside. People hearing noises below deck." He laughed again afterward. "Probably rats." Another worker walked past and muttered quietly, "Or ghosts." The men laughed loudly together. Elena looked back at the houseboat. For some reason, she couldn't stop staring at it. The auction continued. People bought equipment, fishing boats, old storage crates. Then finally the auctioneer pointed toward the rusted houseboat. Last item today. Abandoned houseboat number 73. Nobody moved. Nobody cared. Starting bid. $10. Silence. Elena looked around. Not a single hand lifted. The auctioneer sighed impatiently. $10, anyone? Elena swallowed hard. $10! That was almost all the money she had left. It was stupid. Completely stupid. But then she looked toward the dark clouds gathering again over the harbor. Another storm was coming. And tonight she would either sleep under another freezing bus stop or inside something with walls, even broken walls. Her heart pounded. Slowly she raised her hand. The auctioneer blinked. $10 from the girl in the back. Nobody counted. A few people chuckled quietly. Sold. The wooden hammer slammed down loudly. Just like that. Elena owned a houseboat. The dock worker stared at her in disbelief. You serious? She nodded nervously. He laughed under his breath. Well, kid, congratulations. An hour later, Elena stood alone on the floating dock beside her new home. Up close, it looked even worse. Rust stains covered the sides like dried blood. Parts of the roof sagged inward dangerously. The wood beneath her feet creaked loudly, but it floated. Barely. She stepped carefully onto the deck. The houseboat rocked beneath her weight. Inside smelled like mildew and old river water. Dust covered everything. Broken chairs lay overturned across the floor. Mold climbed the corners of the walls. A small kitchen sink dripped steadily into darkness. Drip, drip, drip. Elena moved carefully through the narrow hallway. One tiny bedroom, one bathroom, one small living area, destroyed, but survivable. Maybe. She sat down slowly on an old couch, whose springs groaned loudly beneath her weight, for the first time in weeks. She was indoors. Tears suddenly filled her eyes. Not because the place was beautiful. It wasn't. It was falling apart. But because after weeks of sleeping outside, this broken houseboat somehow felt safer than the world. Elena wiped her face quickly. Okay, she whispered to herself. Can you survive here for a little while? Rain began hitting the roof moments later. Heavy, violent. The entire boat creaked against the storm. Wind howled through broken window cracks. Elena pulled an old blanket. She found inside around her shoulders and sat quietly, listening to the harbor outside. Hours passed. Darkness covered the water completely. The storm grew stronger. Suddenly, thud, Elena froze. The sound came from below the floor. She looked down slowly. Silence. Her breathing quickened. Then, thud, this time louder, like something heavy moving underneath the boat. Elena stood immediately. Hello? No answer. Only rain. Her heartbeat pounded hard in her chest. Probably pipes, or waves, or rats. That's what she told herself. But deep down, it didn't sound like rats. The sound came again. Scrape, like metal dragging slowly across wood. Elena grabbed a rusty flashlight from the kitchen counter and moved carefully toward a narrow staircase near the back wall. It led downward, below deck. The darkness there looked thick and endless. She hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed at her not to go down there. But curiosity pulled harder. Slowly, she stepped downward. The stairs groaned beneath her feet. The flashlight flickered weakly. Dust floated through cold air. At the bottom she found a long storage corridor filled with old boxes and broken furniture covered beneath white sheets. Water dripped somewhere nearby. The air smelled strange. Not rotten, not moldy. Something else, something metallic. Elena moved the flashlight slowly across the room. Then she stopped. At the far end of the corridor, one metal door stood slightly open. Unlike everything else on the boat, that door looked newer, cleaner. The flashlight trembled slightly in her hand. Another sound echoed from behind the door, a faint metallic clink, like chains moving. Elena's breathing became shallow. Someone was down there, or something. She stepped closer, carefully. The floor creaked beneath her shoes. The sound inside stopped immediately. Complete silence. Elena reached the door slowly with shaking fingers. Then she pushed it open. The flashlight beam swept across the room, and Elena suddenly gasped in horror, because inside the hidden room, someone had been living there recently. Elena stood frozen in the hidden room beneath the houseboat. Her flashlight trembled violently in her hand. The room was clean. Too clean. Upstairs, dust covered everything like the boat had been abandoned for years. But down here, someone had been living here recently. A lantern glowed softly on a wooden table. Blankets were folded neatly in one corner. Canned food lined the shelves. And beside the lantern sat a cup of coffee, still releasing steam into the cold air. Fresh. Elena's throat tightened. "Hello?" she whispered carefully. No answer came. Only rain hammering against the roof above. She slowly backed toward the staircase, her heartbeat growing louder with every second. Then, creak! Footsteps echoed from upstairs. Heavy footsteps. Elena froze instantly. Someone had entered the boat. The steps moved slowly across the upper floorboards. Then a deep voice called out through the darkness. "Who's down there?" Fear rushed through Elena's body like ice water. She covered her mouth and stayed completely still. The footsteps approached the stairs. Krasik, one step at a time. The old staircase groaned beneath the person's weight. A shadow appeared at the top. Tall, broad shoulders. A lantern flickered in one hand. Elena stumbled backward immediately. "Please don't hurt me." The man stopped. The lantern light revealed a tired older face beneath a grey beard. His clothes were worn and damp from rain, but his eyes looked more broken than dangerous. He stared at Elena in shock. "You bought the boat?" Elena blinked nervously. "What?" "The auction today." His voice lowered. "You bought this place?" Elena nodded slowly. The man closed his eyes for a moment. Like hearing that hurt him somehow. Then he sat heavily in an old chair. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Finally, Elena whispered, "Who are you?" "My name is Walter. Why are you hiding here?" Walter laughed weakly. "Probably for the same reason you bought this boat." He glanced at her backpack. "Because the world leaves some people nowhere else to go." Something about his voice felt honest, painfully honest. Still, Elena stayed cautious. "You scared me." "I know. You shouldn't be living here." "I know that too." Rain crashed harder outside, while Walter quietly heated instant soup on a tiny stove. 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other beneath the lantern light. The hidden room felt strangely warm now, safer, but Elena still felt uneasy. Walter noticed. "You think I'm dangerous." "I don't know you." "That's fair." He stared quietly at the lantern flame. "My daughter was your age once." Elena looked up. Walter grabbed an old framed photograph from the shelf. A smiling teenage girl stood beside him, and a woman with curly dark hair. A family. Happy once. "What happened to them?" Elena asked softly. Walter's expression darkened. "I lost them." The answer sounded heavy, like years of regret lived inside those 3 words. After a long silence, Walter stood and motioned toward another locked metal door deeper in the corridor. "There's something you need to see." He unlocked the door slowly. The room inside was filled with old wooden crates stacked to the ceiling. Elena frowned. "What is this?" Walter opened one crate carefully. Inside were sealed files, photographs, and thick ledgers wrapped in plastic. "Documents," Elena said, confused. Walter nodded. "Evidence." "Evidence of what?" Walter looked directly into her eyes. "Human trafficking." The words hit Elena hard. Walter handed her a photograph. Her hands shook as she looked at it. Dozens of frightened people crowded inside a dark shipping container. Children, women, teenagers. Another photo showed payment records beside shipping schedules. Elena felt sick. Walter spoke quietly. 20 years ago, I worked at the harbor repairing ships. One night I found containers filled with people. Elena stared at him silently. I copied everything I could before reporting it. What happened? Walter's face tightened. The warehouse burned down before I could go public. Elena's eyes widened. The fire wasn't an accident. Walter nodded slowly. The people running the operation blamed me for everything. You were framed? Yes. Why didn't you go to police? Walter laughed bitterly. Because the people behind this owned half the harbor. The room suddenly felt colder. Elena looked around nervously. They still know about this evidence? Walter's silence answered her. Fear crawled into Elena's chest. That explained the hiding, the secrecy, the hidden room. Walter had spent 20 years hiding from dangerous men. Suddenly, bang! Something slammed against the upper deck. Elena jumped violently. Walter extinguished the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. Footsteps echoed above them. Several people. Not one. Flashlights moved across cracks in the ceiling. A deep voice growled upstairs. Search the whole boat. Walter grabbed Elena's wrist immediately. They found us. Elena's breathing became shallow. Who are they? The men from the warehouse fire. Another loud crash shook the boat. Someone kicked open the upstairs door completely. Walter hurried toward the back wall and shoved aside old crates, revealing a narrow, rusted hatch. Cold air rushed inside. Outside floated a tiny emergency rowboat, tied beside the hull. Walter handed Elena a waterproof bag filled with documents. You take these. What? You need to leave now. I'm not leaving you. Walter grabbed her shoulders firmly. Elena, listen to me. It was the first time he said her name. If these files survive, people finally learn the truth. Footsteps pounded toward the basement stairs. Flashlight beams flashed through cracks above them. Elena's eyes filled with tears. What about you? Walter looked toward the staircase quietly. A smile crossed his tired face. I've been running for 20 years. Then he pushed the rowboat away from the hatch. Go. Elena, go. Suddenly, a gunshot exploded upstairs. The footsteps started racing down toward them, and Elena realized the men hunting Walter were willing to kill for those secrets. The gunshot echoed through the houseboat. Elena froze. Her heart felt like it might burst from her chest. Above them, heavy footsteps thundered across the floorboards. Men shouted orders, while flashlights swept through the darkness. Walter grabbed Elena's arm. Go! I'm not leaving you. Elena, listen to me. His voice was calm despite the chaos. You have the evidence. Another crash shook the boat. The men were getting closer. If they get those files back, 20 years of truth disappears. Tears filled Elena's eyes. She had only known Walter for a few hours. Yet somehow she trusted him. Maybe because she recognized the loneliness in him. Maybe because she saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. Or maybe because, for the first time in a very long time, someone had treated her like she mattered. Walter pushed the waterproof bag into her hands. Go! Footsteps reached the lower deck. The first flashlight beam appeared at the end of the corridor. Walter slammed the hatch shut behind her. Walter! Run! The last thing Elena saw was his tired smile. Then she climbed into the small rowboat. Rain poured from the sky. The river rocked violently beneath her. Inside the waterproof bag, the documents felt heavier than gold. They carried secrets powerful people had spent 20 years trying to bury. Elena grabbed the oars and pushed away from the houseboat. Moments later, shouting erupted behind her. The men had reached Walter. A voice screamed angrily, "Where is she?" Another crash followed, then silence. Elena rowed harder, tears mixed with rain on her face. She didn't look back. Not until she reached the far side of the harbor. Only then did she turn around. The old houseboat sat alone in the storm. Dark, silent, like a ghost floating on black water. And Walter was still there. The next morning, Elena barely slept. She spent the night hiding inside an abandoned storage shed near the river. The documents lay beside her. Every time she looked at them, fear returned. The people involved were dangerous. If they had hunted Walter for 20 years, what would they do to her? She considered throwing everything away. Walking away, starting over somewhere else. But then she remembered Walter. His hidden room. His lonely life. His sacrifice. 20 years hiding because nobody believed him. 20 years waiting for the truth to come out. Elena opened one of the files again. Inside were names, photographs, bank records, shipping logs. Enough evidence to destroy powerful people. Enough evidence to finally expose what had happened. She knew what she had to do. That afternoon, Elena walked into the office of an investigative journalist named Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was famous for exposing corruption. At first, she didn't believe Elena. Then she saw the documents. Her expression changed immediately. For hours, they reviewed evidence together. File after file, photo after photo. By evening, Sarah looked stunned. "Do you realize what this is?" Elena nodded. "A crime network. It's much bigger than that." Sarah pointed to several names. "These people became wealthy businessmen." She pointed to another. "This man is a city council member." Another, "A shipping executive." The room fell silent. The evidence connected powerful figures across multiple industries. People respected by the public. People who had spent decades hiding their crimes. Sarah looked at Elena seriously. "We need police protection." The story moved quickly after that. Federal investigators became involved. News agencies received copies of the files. Within days, the scandal exploded across the country. Television stations covered it non-stop. Newspapers published front-page headlines. Arrests began, then more arrests, and more. The network that had survived for decades started collapsing. For the first time in 20 years, the truth was finally winning. But one question remained. What happened to Walter? Nobody knew. The men who attacked the houseboat disappeared before authorities arrived. The houseboat itself was found abandoned. No sign of Walter. No sign of a struggle. Nothing. Weeks passed. Then months. The investigation continued. Meanwhile, Elena's life slowly changed. Sarah helped her find temporary housing. Community organizations offered support. People heard her story. The homeless teenager who uncovered one of the biggest criminal scandals in the region. For the first time in years, Elena felt hopeful. One cold morning, nearly 6 months later, she received a letter. No return address, no sender name. Just her name written carefully across the front. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Elena stared. It was Walter. Older, smiling, standing beside a small lake surrounded by mountains. On the back, only 4 words were written. "Thank you for believing." Tears instantly filled Elena's eyes. He was alive. Walter had survived. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she smiled. A real smile. The kind she hadn't felt in years. Months later, Elena returned to the harbor. The storm-damaged houseboat was gone. Only an empty dock remained. People walked past without knowing what had happened there, without knowing how one forgotten boat had changed countless lives. Elena stood quietly by the water. The wind moved gently across the harbor. She thought about the night she spent under the bus stop. Cold, hungry, alone. Back then, she believed she had lost everything. But sometimes life hides strange paths inside its darkest moments. If Elena had never become homeless, she never would have bought the houseboat. If she never bought the houseboat, she never would have met Walter. And if she never met Walter, the truth might have remained buried forever. The river sparkled beneath bright daylight. Elena removed the old photograph of her mother from her pocket. For years it had been her only reminder of hope. Now she looked at it differently, not as a symbol of loss, but as proof that love and courage continue long after people are gone. "I think you'd be proud," she whispered. The wind carried her words across the water. Then Elena smiled and walked away from the harbor. Not as a homeless girl, not as a victim, but as someone who had discovered that even the most broken paths can lead to extraordinary destinations. And somewhere far away, beside a quiet mountain lake, an old man finally lived in peace, knowing the truth he protected for 20 years had finally been set free.